Hey, DawgNation, happy Thursday. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Hope all of you are doing well. I tell you, it was a wild, late night, early morning with a lot of storms rolling through a lot of places around the South, certainly here in the Atlanta area where I live. A lot of folks without power. Really, at our house, we were lucky to kind of miss most of that. I mean, I think we had some high winds, and there was some damage in my neighborhood, as it turns out, but for the most part, we seem to be doing okay, so hopefully you find yourself in kind of a safe situation here today as well. We're going to try to entertain you with some college football talk, some Georgia football talk, which is the best kind of football talk of all. Terrence Edwards on the way. A look at what one ESPN analyst has said about the Georgia quarterback situation. A little bit of an interesting update from yesterday on Georgia wide receiver George Pickens. Want to make sure we touch on that. And a little bit of a preview of what could be kind of a busy time coming up when it comes to recruiting stuff. So there's a lot on the table for today's show. So let's go ahead and get it started. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I was saying this to our video audience a moment ago that I really feel incredibly blessed here this morning that for the most part, the crazy storms that rolled through did not seem to impact my house, my family all that much. There was some damage in my neighborhood. I understand there's almost 200,000 people in and around us that are without power right now. So hopefully you're safe. Hopefully you're able to kind of pick up the pieces. It was a wild late night, early morning around with all of that. So obviously our thoughts and prayers, and we mean that, truly, are going out to the folks who find themselves dealing with that right now, and hopefully we'll hear stories of good news about everything kind of being okay. But it was certainly heavy winds, crazy weather that kind of rolled through last night. So as a distraction from all that, as a way of hopefully entertaining you, we'll turn our attention to the Dogs on Saturday heading towards Kentucky. And I want to begin with the quarterback spot because obviously that has been such a hot topic over the course of the last few days. And I want to give you a taste of what ESPN analyst Booger McFarland said on the Paul Feinbaum show when he made an appearance there. I guess this would have been yesterday. So, and McFarland's going to make it very clear that I guess now he's doing like an NFL countdown show with Chris Berman, that this is not the guy that was once really heavily plugged into the SEC, working on SEC now, making regular appearances in the Paul Feinbaum show. This is a guy now who, after spending some time in the Monday Night Football booth, I guess kind of fashions himself a little bit more of a NFL analyst. That's kind of how he's been repackaged and branded, a little bit of a gimmick change for Booger on that front. But he makes the appearance on the Feinbaum show yesterday. He's asked about a couple of the topics around the SEC. The subject of Stetson Bennett, Georgia quarterback, comes up. And I think McFarland here is a stand-in as an ESPN analyst for just kind of what common opinion is on the UGA quarterback situation at the moment. People who, are not living and dying with every snap and every play the way that you and I are, but people who are just kind of aware of the situation. This is, I would say, a rather harsh evaluation, but nonetheless an interesting one for how Booger McFarland currently sees the UGA quarterback situation as explained on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday. Let me let you have a taste of that.
Can Georgia survive against Florida next week and maybe against Alabama again with him at quarterback?
No, and if I were to call Kirby or text Kirby, I'd tell him the same thing. I like the mailman. It's a great story. I love it. It's good for to talk about on the radio, and it's going to make a good 30 for 31 day. But if Kirby Smart is trying to get over the hump, Paul, and by the hump I mean win a championship, you got to have a playmaker at that position.
So Booger McFarland says, hey, Stetson Bennett, good story, not necessarily good quarterback, not the kind of guy that you're going to go out and win a championship with. And I think, after 2 weeks of this, I think we've all kind of been, kind of wrestling with this and dealing with this. And Booger McFarland's really engaging in that on the same level that we were sort of at 2 weeks ago, that there was a very good chance, it certainly seems true, that Stetson Bennett is not a championship-level quarterback the way that Mac Jones is at Alabama, the way that Trevor Lawrence is at Clemson, the way that Justin Fields is at Ohio State. That's just not quite what Stetson Bennett is. And so at this point in time, we've all kind of figured out what Booger McFarland seems to figure out there. So the question becomes, Well, what do you do in response to that? So if we agree that Stetson Bennett and Trevor Lawrence won't be mentioned in the same sentence together very much, then what do you do in response to all of that? And that's where I think the frustration comes for many people. The evaluation is fairly cut and dry. If you're comparing Bennett to the very best quarterbacks in college football, there's probably something that he's left lacking. But there is also probably a reason that Stetson Bennett is currently starting at the Georgia quarterback spot. And once again, Booger McFarland on the Feinbaum Show kind of touched on some of that yesterday as well. Here's a little more from Booger.
I'm not sure what's going on with JT Daniels. I'm not as connected down in Athens, but it seems like to me, Paul, that if Bennett is the best that they have, then that says a lot about JT Daniels. I just think when you go against a team like an Alabama, when you go against Florida, and if they can figure out how to play defense again because A&M hit them up for 40 points, when you go against Ohio State, when you go against Clemson, you got to have a guy at the position that you don't have to coach around. I feel like right now Kirby Smart is having to coach around the mailman and not coach for him. And Kirby won't admit it. Maybe Kirby knows something we don't. I'll leave it up to him. But I just know from a playmaking standpoint, he's not on the same level as a Mac Jones, as a Justin Fields, as a Trevor Lawrence, as some of the other upper echelon quarterbacks in this league.
So when McFarland says, hey, maybe Kirby Smart knows something that I don't, I think Kirby Smart obviously knows something in this case that Booger McFarland doesn't. And McFarland is kind of a stand-in for a lot of the common opinion about the situation right now of, well, there must be some sort of reason JT Daniels is not playing. And I think over and over again, those of us who've been a little closer to the situation have said, yes, there is. JT Daniels is almost certainly hurt, and he has almost certainly been hurt the entire time he's been at the University of Georgia, or the entire time since it was announced that he was transferring to the University of Georgia. That is almost certainly what is going on here, that in terms of turning to Daniels to save the day for Georgia, the quarterback position, that likely just isn't available to UGA right now. Otherwise, there's almost, certainly a very good chance that's exactly what Georgia would be looking to do, which once again kind of gets us back to the reality of the situation. Not the reality that we wish was true, but the reality that actually is true. In light of Daniels not being healthy, in light of the other options still being relatively inexperienced, what is the best way to get the most out of the quarterback situation that you can get? And as an optimistic appraisal here for a moment, the one thing that I vehemently disagree with Booger McFarland on is the notion that Florida, Georgia's opponent 2 weeks from now, is in the same category of Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, whoever else, as the very best teams in the country, the kind of game where you have to have the elite quarterback play to win that. I don't think that's true for Florida at all. I think the last couple of years for Georgia are kind of proof of that good can be good enough against the Gators, knowing they don't run it particularly well. They don't play defense particularly well. Those are examples where Georgia has a huge edge in those categories, and those categorical edges can mitigate a little bit the disadvantage that Georgia might have at the quarterback spot there. The Florida game remains very winnable for UGA, despite the fact the quarterback situation and really the offense in general is a little bit of a work in progress. But it kind of puts some stats behind this just for a moment. I think it's important to remind folks again that this is likely not one of those situations where the stubborn Kirby Smart wants to trust the so-called game manager quarterback and not risk it with a more impressive athlete, whether that impressive athlete is Dwan Mathis or eventually healthy JT Daniels or something along those lines. That Kirby doesn't want to risk it with the more spectacular player. He wants the more stable game manager style Stetson Bennett. As we've been saying, a lot here, Stetson Bennett is not a typical game manager. There are games thus far this season where Bennett has played above, and we all kind of know that sort of backhanded compliment, damning someone with faint praise that exists of the notion of a game manager. There are moments this year in which Bennett has been better than the typical game manager, and obviously in the second half of the Alabama game, he was far worse than a so-called game manager. He wasn't really managing the game very well at all. He was putting the ball in a harm's way. And really, when it comes to the totality of Bennett's season, some of what he has done is lived with a high level of risk tolerance, maybe more so than Kirby Smart would probably prefer. There's a guy named SEC StatCat on Twitter. He puts a lot of stuff out. I like his content as a fan myself. I'm hesitant sometimes to share too much of it because I can't validate if any of this kind of stuff is true. You sort of have to take his word on this and assume that he's just watching every snap of every SEC game 9,000 times in order to tabulate these numbers. But this is what he put out on Twitter yesterday, and this kind of speaks to the notion of Kirby Smart is not playing Stetson Bennett because he's a game manager, because Bennett right now really isn't managing the game. StatCat writes on Twitter that the SEC passers with the most interceptable passes entering Week 6, not the most interceptions, but passes that he says could have been intercepted. KJ Costello at Mississippi State as the highest on that list. He's got 23. Then it's Bo Nix after that with 13. Matt Corral at 12. And then Stetson Bennett, according to SEC StatCat, is fourth in the SEC in that category with 11 passes that could have been intercepted. Only 3 of them have been intercepted thus far, but Stetson Bennett near the top of the SEC in terms of passes that could have been intercepted. Folks, that's not what a game manager does. And this is not me kind of bagging on Stetson Bennett and criticizing him. As I've said, as I've kind of said over and over, Bennett is what he is, and what he has been for Georgia, frankly, is probably more good than bad. But the point that I'm bringing up here is a game manager is supposed to avoid interceptions, supposed to not throw interceptable passes. That's not exactly what Bennett has done. So therefore, you take from that the reason why Smart is playing Bennett is not because he's the most careful quarterback on the Georgia roster. Bennett's not particularly careful. It may just be that he's either the healthiest in comparison to JT Daniels or the better option because of his experience in comparison right now to Dwan Mathis and Carson Beck. Obviously, the next data point in all this discussion is going to be what happens on Saturday when you head towards Kentucky, and I expect Bennett to play better. The fact is he actually played pretty well in the first half of the game against Alabama and against a lesser opponent in a more winnable game and a style of game that probably benefits Georgia. My guess, we see a pretty good version of Stetson Bennett. But obviously, one of the things that you got to figure out as you head towards a game like this is, well, how do you help Bennett get better? And we heard some audio from Kirby a little earlier this week about the things he wants to see from Bennett, but also around him, there are some things that need to change, including the Georgia offensive line, what has apparently been a little bit of a commitment from them to make sure there's not as many batted balls by the defensive line as what Alabama had a week ago. Thought yesterday was kind of interesting to hear Georgia center Trey Hill on that topic of exactly what an offensive line can do to help Bennett make sure he has the best game that he possibly can. This is Trey Hill.
Helping Stetson, just us up front, basically getting D linemen's hands down. I know that was we had a lot of batted balls in the Alabama game. So getting linemen's hands down and just moving them around.
How do you do that?
It's different type ways. You just gotta know what you're doing as an offensive lineman to get their hands down.
So on our show, we typically share audio clips. We don't typically do video clips. This is one of those moments where it's probably worth going to the DawgNation YouTube page and seeing the video of Trey Hill right there, because when the reporter asked him, so how is it that you do prevent these batted passes? Hill's kind of laughing a little bit, or he's at least trying to hold back a little bit of laughter in terms of maybe he does not really quite sure he's supposed to admit and say, like, what you do that prevents a defensive lineman from feeling the willingness and the freedom to kind of put his hands up in the air and try to bat a pass down. Obviously, that involves a brute level of physicality right there in the breadbasket, maybe, which is well within the rules here. But maybe Trey Hill doesn't quite want to admit exactly everything that goes on around that front. It's actually pretty interesting stuff. But it's also a kind of a reminder here of, for Georgia, as Booger McFarland kind of, very matter-of-factly laid out, this is not a perfect situation right now. Georgia does not have one of those first-round, record-setting quarterbacks the way that the best teams in college football have seemed to have the last couple of years. So in response to that, you're left to wonder, well, you just pack it up and give up on the season? Or do you get as good as you can get right now in the hopes that somehow things get better eventually? Obviously, the latter would be the better choice here. Do what you can do against Kentucky on Saturday. Set yourself up to be as good as you need to be against Florida the following week, and then let the chips fall where they may after that. I'm fine with that version of Georgia right now because, really, what other choice do you have? My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Great to have you with us. Streaming video, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, podcasts, like 1,000 different ways to access the show. The Apple Player, the Google Player, the world-famous DawgNation.com, Spotify as well. And, of course, our radio partners there in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We love being able to be with them as well, and we are grateful to have all of you with us here today, too. We'll do more on the Georgia offense coming up in a moment. We'll welcome in former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards as a part of our program here today. Let me give a quick shout out though to my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. They're your source for Georgia divorce, and it is an important level of advocacy that they're able to provide because the divorce process is just kind of something that no one, in some cases, envisions they'll ever go through. And when you find yourself going through it, it can be, frankly, a little bit of a scary, confusing process. That's why it's important to lean on an organization that has been through this thousands of times. That is what Merriweather and Tharp has done. When they've been through this, when they've helped clients over and over again, year after year after year, you gain expertise from that. And all that expertise, that learned, lived experience becomes an asset that you can use at your disposal as you go through your divorce. Maybe the first time for you, but they've been through this thousands and thousands of times before. So take the first step, and then they will walk with you every step of the way after that. They are your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. That'll get you in touch with Merriweather and Tharp. Before I get Terrence Edwards, let me do a quick version of Around the Doghouse right now. It is delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. We talked about George Pickens a little earlier this week. We were kind of focusing in on those areas for offensive improvement for Georgia, and getting the ball to George Pickens is one of the things that we addressed as part of that a little earlier this week. I also kind of want to mention here for a moment the fact that Kirby Smart addressed Pickens a little bit yesterday on Wednesday when he did his SEC teleconference. Pickens had been rumored might be a little bit banged up right now. Smart was asked about that directly. Let me give you the quote from Smart here. I won't put this on the screen. I'll just read it to you quickly. He says, George should be fine. He's in and out based on being dinged up a couple of times, but we have a lot of guys that way. And Smart goes on to say that Pickens did practice on Tuesday. So take that for what you will. Pickens apparently a little banged up. Smart admits that, but saying he did practice and expecting to play on Saturday. And I guess I kind of also wanted to circle back for a moment on just the statistical performance for Pickens thus far this year. I think there's a lot of talk about, maybe Pickens not having as good a year as folks hoped he would have had and things like that. And he still has 2 touchdowns. He only had 8 a year ago by only. I mean, it's not inconceivable that Pickens could still this season match everything that he did for Georgia a season ago if the pace can be picked up a little bit. But consider this. And I know people now think that Auburn and Tennessee aren't very good, and obviously they've kind of given you some reasons to feel that way. But if you look at Georgia's first 4 games, 3 of the games they played were against opponents who were ranked at the time the game was played. The 4th in that situation is Arkansas, and Barry Odom, the Arkansas defensive coordinator, is getting some talk right now as the nation's top assistant. So as Georgia moves towards the second half of the season, with the exception of the Florida game, and Florida's obviously had its defensive issues, the schedule's about to really ease up for Georgia here. So if you're looking at whether it be Pickens or a lot of guys for Georgia right now, statistical benchmarks maybe not quite where you thought they'd be, there is still some time for some of this to change as Georgia moves towards the second half of the season. That's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered by Marco's Pizza, America's most beloved pizza, because it's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. We love recommending Marco's Pizza here on our program because it's great pizza at a great price as well. In fact, you can get a large specialty pizza right now, such as like the white cheesy. That's an example of that. And a large 2-topping pizza for just $23.99. Great deal on that. You can order delivery through the Marco's app or at marcos.com. It'll be baked in a 450-degree oven and then sent contactless, touchless, right there to you. You get a great chance to enjoy that. Around the Doghouse, delivered today by Marco's Pizza. All right, there's a lot more on Georgia, Kentucky, and the current state of the Georgia offense I want to get to. With that in mind, let's get ready to talk to former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And, of course, we'll say hello to Terrence Edwards here. Always great to have him on the program, and we've enjoyed having him as part of our Dog Nation postgame show presented by the UGA Bookstore. That show coming back on Saturday after the Kentucky game. There is a chance that Terrence might not be with us on Saturday. I want to make sure I'm clear about that. We'll talk about that coming up here just a little bit. But first, Terrence, let me welcome you back to DawgNation Daily, presented by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp today. I hope you're doing well, and thank you for spending some time with us.
Hey, B, how you doing? I'm doing well, thank you.
Good to hear that. Let me pick up on the subject that we were just talking about on wide receivers. And, I think you and I have talked about this a lot. Getting more out of George Pickens here, first of all. This is a guy that you've called a true number 1 receiver for Georgia in his freshman season. He obviously proved that to be true, put up big numbers, the kinds of numbers that a Georgia receiver hadn't really put up in a number of years prior to that. This year, getting him the football as much as you want has proven to be maybe a little bit difficult. How does Georgia do better with that in the second half? Is it simply a function of maybe playing some lesser opponents who've given up more passing yards, or is there something you think Todd Monken can do schematically to make sure that Pickens is getting that football?
I think two things that we could do. First thing is having other receivers step up, and that's what we have done. We've had Jermaine Burton step up. We've had Kearis Jackson step up. So defenses can't solely focus on George Pickens because they didn't think we had other receivers that can make plays. So that's number one. Number two is I just think Georgia has to do a better job of putting him in position to get the ball, knowing that this is going to him and solely him. But it's just not necessarily him being in the boundary as the X receiver, the single receiver. So we can do some stacks and bunts and motions to just get him in position to be successful. I think we've been too stagnant of keeping him on a single receiver side, but we got to do some things to dramatically to get him open.
I think that's really interesting. The other day we had your former quarterback David Green on the show, and I asked him about you. I said, Terrence is a 1,000-yard receiver, so clearly you were looking to get him involved in the offense. But, how do you do that? Obviously making the comparison to the Pickens situation. And what David said was, listen, Terrence many times was the number one read on a lot of the plays that we ran. But even with a 1,000-yard receiver such as yourself, you couldn't ever go into a play saying, we're going to get the ball here to Terrence no matter what. And obviously, conversely, for 2020, we're going to get the ball to Pickens here no matter what. But you still have to read a defense. You still have to, kind of go through your progressions. Even if the top receiver is the number one read on the play, there's no such thing as saying, we're going to deliver the football to this guy no matter what. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree. There's times when you and I spoke about it when you just thought sometimes you just have to force them the ball. And like I told you, I agreed to that to an extent. Just depends on the timing of the game. So I just think we just got to do a better job of moving him around, just not keeping him in that X position. If defenses knows that he's just going to be to the boundary receiver, they're going to have ways schematically for them to just take him out. So I think this bye week, Georgia would do a better job of just moving him around, get him opportunities to be open.
So moving on to Kentucky here for a moment, as a former player, how ready do you think Georgia is to kind of get back to playing someone other than themselves? It's been 2 weeks worth of practicing against your own teammates. There's obviously a bad taste in the mouths here because of what happened in the last game against Alabama. How much do you think Georgia's chomping at the bit to get out there and show something new against a new opponent and just really kind of get back to the business of football again?
I could go back to the 2002 season when we lost to Florida and we had a bye week. And, man, that long week was just a week of reflecting, trying to figure out how we could get better. And it was a week of, man, we got 2 weeks before we could get back on the field to take this sour stain out of our mouth. So we went back to the drawing boards, and I think they're going to go back and just self-evaluate and try to get better. Each person, each coach, each player, each trainer have to go and self-evaluate and see what they could do better, that they could bring to the table to make this Georgia team better.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how all that plays out. It's Terrence Edwards here, a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And Terrence also been great all year long as part of our DawgNation postgame show presented by the UGA Bookstore. And don't forget, for a lot of you, it's home gating this year. You're not in Athens as much as you maybe have been in the past, but you still want to look great on game day, and the UGA Bookstore gives you a chance to do that. And by the way, I'm wearing kind of some of the old Nike coaches gear myself here today from the UGA Bookstore. So the UGA Bookstore stuff looks great, and you can obviously check all of it out. Whether you stop by there, you can shop 7 days a week in Athens, or find them online, UGAbookstore.com. It's a great way to look great in your UGA gear and enjoy the most of the season decked out in fine apparel, whether it be, as I said, the Nike stuff or the Vineyard Vines, Tommy Bahama. The only place you can get the UGA 10 line from Peter Millar. Just great selection of UGA apparel. Find it at the UGA Bookstore. All right, Terrence, I'm sure you've been kind of digesting some this week and really the last couple of weeks, everything that's been said about the UGA quarterback situation. There's a desire to maybe, see JT Daniels, although it certainly sounds like he's likely not very healthy. There's maybe a curiosity of, well, should Dwan Mathis, who earned a start for the first game, eventually get a little longer look for some expanded playing time? Is there a chance that Stetson Bennett bounces back and plays better after a second half against Alabama that didn't go the way that that he wanted to go. If I were to ask you, what you make of the quarterback situation at the moment heading into Kentucky on Saturday, what's your evaluation of this right now?
Right now, I totally believe, for someone being in the locker room and understands, I totally believe something is going on with JT Daniels. I don't know, don't have any inside information. He's just too talented not to be in consideration for some playing time. I just truly believe that. So I just feel like hopefully we can get to a sizable lead this Saturday against Kentucky, so we can see maybe DeJuan Mathis get some more time out there. Maybe we can see JT Daniels get some time out there. So, but Kirby's made it clear that Stetson is our quarterback. But my question is, how short of a leash would it be now? We know with Stetson coming off of a 3 interception performance, if he goes out and perform the same way he did against Bama, if the leash is going to be short, and who will the Georgia coaches turn to? Those would be my questions leading to this game.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. What you mentioned, the idea of a sizable lead, you get a chance to play more quarterbacks. One of the things that, some people have said is, in the past, when Georgia has found some playing time for, a guy like Mathis coming in, maybe after Stetson, Bennett, and, the Tennessee game, something like that, that it becomes just kind of a opportunity to hand the football off. It's not a chance to run the full Georgia offense. Is that something that you've also seen? And, let's say that Georgia is lucky enough to be up big enough to put in a new quarterback in this game on Saturday. How much do you want to see that quarterback be able to have that leash kind of come off him a little bit and him kind of go out there and play just as freely as a starter might be able to?
Exactly. I don't want to see Matthews just come in and hand the ball off. I wanted him to have the whole playbook available to his dispense, to go out there and see what he can do. The old adage is you're only one player away from being the guy again. So we have to put him in situations for his development, have to put him in situations that he can understand the game. Let the game slow down. So it is imperative that whoever that backup quarterback is, we need to develop them in real life action.
So if you look at the forecast for Saturday in Lexington, it's not crazy. The high is 58, low, which I'm assuming is later on that evening, down to about 47. At least that's what it is right now. Probably talking about a little bit of a cooler morning there. This is the certainly the coolest game that Georgia's played thus far this year. And I'm always kind of fascinated. You can simulate rain in practice a little bit with the wet football. Obviously, you can simulate heat. All you have to do is, go outside. In Georgia, you get some extreme heat conditions. A little bit colder weather, a little bit different on that. Now, it's not cold enough on Saturday to probably truly be considered a cold weather game. But as a guy like yourself who kind of, grew up in Georgia and, you experienced a lot of hot days, how much did you notice when that weather dips below, a certain temperature and all of a sudden you feel a little chill on your skin? Does that affect the way that you play? Do you think it affects the way that Georgia plays on Saturday?
The cold won't really affect them. It's just if the wind is a factor in the game. 50 degrees is, high 50 is going to be, that's good football. And I think all of these guys are used to playing in that type of weather, even if you're from the state of Georgia. So that won't affect. It's just the wind, rain affect the game more. So I expect it to be a clear day. I haven't checked the forecast, so you didn't mention anything about rain or wind. So I expect the guys to go out there with the mindset that they're going to put the Alabama game behind them and go and perform to the best of their ability.
Well, Terrence, we certainly appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today, and your insight on all of this is obviously incredibly valuable. We'll look forward to getting a chance to talk to you soon, and as I said before, there is a chance that you might not be with us for the post-game show on Saturday. I know that you are also a coach, and your team's got a game here coming up, maybe on Saturday, so we'll let folks know for sure about that. But even if you can't be with us this week, obviously you'll look forward to being with us again the following week for the Georgia-Florida game and the post-game show there presented by the UGA bookstore. So I just want to make sure we keep people updated on that schedule, and we just certainly appreciate you, and we'll look forward to talking to you whenever we get a chance to do that again.
Thank you. I'll definitely let you know what my schedule is. Hopefully it is rescheduled for Friday night and not Saturday evening. So, but I look forward to talking to y'all, Brandon. Thanks again.
All right, thanks a lot, Terrence. Yeah, so Terrence is a coach and obviously does personal coaching stuff, but he also does some work with the Pace Academy program there as well. And so, like a lot of Georgia's programs, they are, facing some shifting, schedule scenarios, potentially anyway, on the basis of the weather and how things are going on there. So a lot of high school folks dealing with that right now. And as Terrence and I were talking about, you talk about 50-degree-ish weather for a Georgia-Kentucky game. That's not crazy bad cold, and Terrence is right. And you've heard this over and over again. Quarterbacks have said this, wide receivers have said this, other people have said this, that when it comes to what really impacts a game, it's not a little bit of cold, it's not, necessarily a little bit of rain, although last year Georgia was, seemed to be heavily impacted by the rain scenario. What ends up really getting you is when you do have that wind condition. That truly does affect the flight of a ball and kind of everything else around that. I will say in the NFL, and I've talked to some NFL players, and they've told me this, that when you get those like crazy cold games in the NFL where it gets just way down temperatures, below freezing, in some cases below 0 degrees, especially if you're playing up in the Northeast, something like that. Come January in a playoff game, for instance, I went to the Falcons NFC Championship game back in 04, 05, whatever year that was, when they were in Philadelphia that year, and that was very cold. Snowed like 9-10 inches, below 0 degree type temperatures. And like the one thing a lot of Falcons players said at the time is the way the cold weather impacts in a game like that is that you want to stay in the locker room as long as possible, and you're tempted to not come out on the field until you absolutely have to because of how cold it is out there. And that just kind of affects your pregame rhythm, your pregame routine. So obviously in college football, we don't really get temperatures quite so low on that front. And on Saturday, it's not expected to be, cold enough to really matter, but it will be cooler than Georgia's played thus far this season. I do love Terrence's perspective, though, as a former player, just around the notion of, how you bounce back and how you're eager to go out and change the storyline. And gosh knows, y'all followed a lot of this stuff, whether it be what you've seen on social media, what people have even written to me about on social media, what our comments are like on our video shows here, what we're forced to talk about here on our own program. There's just a lot of negativity that comes after a loss, especially for Georgia when it's a loss against an opponent like Alabama in a game that a lot of folks had circled. And it seems to exaggerate some concerns that Georgia fans already had. That's just a really natural tendency. And Georgia's not the only program that would deal with that. Every fan base in college football kind of deals with the same thing. You're always only kind of one loss away from message board meltdown or streaming video meltdown in terms of the comment section, everything like that. And there's really no amount of words that can solve that problem whatsoever, right? I mean, I can try to say, I think that things are going to be better and Georgia's going to bounce back, and we'll wait and see what happens come December if Georgia plays Alabama again. But those words only soothe people so much, because the truth is they want to see it with their own eyes. The only thing that can truly make fans feel better after a game like the one that Georgia experienced 2 weeks ago is a new opponent and a new game, and on Saturday Georgia gets that again. I guess the point that I'm getting to here is that if fans feel that way, if they are chomping at the bit just to see some more football, some more data, to learn more about what Georgia currently truly has going on here, and just to feel better about maybe, what I think is going to be a game where Georgia kicks around an inferior opponent. If fans want to see that, imagine how much more players themselves want to go out there and do that. They get sick and tired of practicing against themselves. It almost becomes like a de facto summer situation again, where you're just colliding against your own teammates over and over again. You better believe those red jerseys, or Saturday, I guess it'll be white jerseys, silver breeches, are looking forward to hitting something in Kentucky blue after hitting each other for as much as they have been. And I think that Terrence does a really good job of sharing that perspective, and I hope we get a chance to hear from him on the DawgNation postgame show presented by the UGA Bookstore on Saturday. And hopefully, when that conversation takes place, we are talking about a big Georgia win and maybe a little bit of a reboot of the mood around DawgNation after what has been a little bit of a sour couple of weeks.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, there's a lot to get to related to our SEC Through, and some of this kind of bleeds into the rest of college football a little bit too. We'll do that coming up. Before that, let me remind you, as you're getting ready for a fun weekend, Halloween, many of you expecting to be outside enjoying some time for that, or just football all weekend long. One of the things that pairs great with that is some delicious Classic City Lager from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing Company. It is an Athens original. When I am in Athens, I love drinking some Classic City Lager. But the great news is you don't have to be in Athens to get it. You can get that taste of Athens, and a reminder of what makes the Classic City so great anywhere you go, because in any retailer they're going to have some Creature Comforts, brewing selections. And Classic City Lager would be my recommendation to you. It's a lighter beer, lager style beer. No sacrifice on the flavor, though. It is good cold beer, crisp flavor, so enjoyable, fun to drink. 6 12-pack cans, available 12 months a year. Please make sure you check out Classic City Lager. And if you want to know more about it, use the hashtag GoodColdBeer. That'll give you a lot more information on that. All right, let's roll through here and do some SEC through stuff. And I want to begin with some 2022 decommits. And probably should have mentioned this yesterday on the show, did not. Jeremiah Alexander, huge 2022 prospect, weak side defensive end type out of the state of Alabama, was an Alabama commit. He's now decommitted from that program. The internet seems to think that Georgia's going to be all over Alexander here, at least attempting to be. Dogs probably won't be the only program saying that. But the Alexander decommitment, one of the top players for the class of 2022, decommitting from Alabama, could be a big deal for Georgia. And it seems like, we'll do more of this in a moment, it seems like there's a lot of recruiting momentum with the Dogs right now. Obviously, a lot of this related to the class of 2021. But that 2022 stuff is really starting to take shape. Very interesting goings-on for Georgia potential in the class of 2022. That is worth talking about. Now, I thought it was really interesting yesterday on another subject involving the 2022 class for a moment. It was amazing how much chatter the decommitment of Quinn Ewers is. Now, Ewers is a huge quarterback prospect for the class of 2022, had been committed to Texas. He goes to Carroll High School, so he's sort of Texan through and through, was a Texas commit and is now decommitted. Now, this is interesting for a couple of reasons, both in terms of what it means for the school that Ewers is leaving and kind of where he may be going after that. Obviously, this feels like more negative momentum for Tom Herman and Texas. The Herman situation is really, really interesting. First of all, they play on Saturday as an underdog against Oklahoma State. Now, Herman has typically been pretty good as an underdog. Think about the Sugar Bowl against Georgia, for instance, on this. When Herman has faced a team in which he's not expected to win, he's actually performed pretty well. He's kept it closer with Oklahoma than he's supposed to, kind of a few times. It's when expectations get high. When you start hearing people say Texas is back, that's when Herman's had an issue. So Tom Herman, I would say, desperately needs a win on Saturday against what I would view as a beatable team in Oklahoma State. Because beyond that, almost everything related to the program in Austin right now is just really bad, just kind of a bad vibe. Whatever's going on with the eyes of Texas are upon you. That's been controversial. But really, it's mostly about just on-field performance not being as good as it's supposed to be. And when you have a big-time quarterback, Texas has kind of always been a quarterback state. You've had a lot of great ones come out of that state over the years. When a big-time quarterback decommits, there's just going to be a lot of eyes on, is this the beginning of the end in terms of the certainly Tom Herman honeymoon, if not Tom Herman era there in Austin. You hear a lot of like Urban Meyer chatter from Texas message boards, things like that. So a potential Texas implosion is probably worth watching here, although that may be overstating things just a bit. Internet seems to think that Ewers could be on his way to Ohio State. There's been a lot of that prediction activity saying that he's heading there, and it just kind of goes to show that there is a brand that Ohio State has established for itself on the offensive side of the ball. They haven't recruited running backs particularly well, although they do have pretty sizable commit for the class of 2021 right now in Henderson. But when it comes to elite wide receivers, Ohio State has no problem getting any of them. In terms of moving in on a quarterback committed to Texas, Ohio State's able to do that. That there is a recruiting brand offensively that Ohio State has established for itself right now. I would give Ryan Day credit for doing that, and maybe kind of another example of that there. Let me turn my attention now back fully to the SEC during our SEC through here. And I'll mention the Mike Leach situation again, because we talked about Colin Hill looking like his career at Starkville could be done. Leach, in speaking about this, threatened that there could be more to come on all of this. This is exactly what Mike Leach does everywhere where he's ever been. When things go bad, he blames players. And listen, media loves Leach because he's so funny and he's so unorthodox and he's not boring the way the other coaches are. But this was always going to be a disaster, just waiting to happen in Starkville. By the way, the Starkville media, for the most part, hasn't really set their teeth in on Leach yet, truly, holding him to account for why, things are going the way they are right now. Wait till that starts happening, because this is not, like Pullman, Washington media corps or Lubbock, Texas media corps. As I've said a million times, Starkville may be a small town, But in the SEC, there is no anonymity. That those folks in Mississippi want their team to win, even if there are fewer of them, they are just as rabid and as intense as any other SEC fans are. And at a certain point in time, the media in Starkville is going to step up and try to serve the desires of what Mississippi State fans want, which is some questions of, hey, why aren't things going better right now, and why are so many players leaving my favorite program? Imagine how sour things are going to get once that happens. Watch for that when it comes to Mike Leach. And then last SEC through story to get to, I know Todd Grantham has kind of spoken out a little bit this week about improvements he wants to see from the Florida defense on Saturday. And obviously, Florida's been through a tough situation when it comes to the coronavirus thing, and we've said on this show that all you can do is take them at their word that they've had this outbreak to deal with. The SEC's kind of moved around its schedule. Georgia cooperated on that. I think that was the right thing to do because I think you want to keep that train on the tracks in terms of everyone having a chance to play all 10 of its games, something right now it looks like the Big Ten is not going to be able to do this year. But apart from whatever Florida has dealt with in regards to coronavirus, there is also the issue of trying to get better on the field. And how do you do that without practice? Who really knows? But I'm sure Florida has tried. They are back practicing in right now. And against Missouri on Saturday, a team that has thrown the ball pretty well in its last two wins, a little bit against Kentucky, a lot against LSU in the game before that, it does become an interesting defensive challenge for Florida. Playing at home again after struggling on the road in the last game against Texas A&M, which seemed like 6 months ago. But a chance for Florida to show some defensive improvement and maybe setting up what could be a preview of a massive, massive showdown against Georgia the following Saturday. Stakes could not be higher for the cocktail party. We've been saying this over and over and over again. There's a narrative in place on both sides. The narrative for Florida is Dan Mullen may not have as good of players as Georgia does, but he's such a good game coach. He's such a brilliant offensive mastermind that he's a real threat to UGA. The narrative on the Georgia side is Kirby Smart may not have the offensive firepower that Florida does, but his ability to construct a program, depth of roster, tenacity on defense, makes him exactly the kind of coach that Dan Mullen is just going to wilt in comparison to. One of those narratives has a hard time fully surviving that game next Saturday. And with Georgia getting ready to play Kentucky this upcoming weekend, it's not too early to start thinking about the Florida Gators after that. And we'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, I want to turn our attention now back fully to UGA for a moment. I want to do this kind of around the world of recruiting here for a moment. And, Kroger is fresh for everyone. And every week during our program, they bring you the Kroger Fresh Take. And I tell you, boy, you talk about fresh. Right now, the situation involving UGA recruiting is feeling incredibly fresh. There's a lot of moving pieces here that I want to make sure that we kind of touch on for a moment. First of all, Tyron Ingram-Dawkins, big defensive line prospect. He's getting ready to announce his commitment tomorrow. It seems like Georgia's very much in the mix on this, and obviously defensive line is one of those positions that Georgia is in a big need for here for the upcoming recruiting class. So TID, if you want to call him that, that's a name to be paying attention to. The Amari Daniel situation, the running back from down in South Florida that Jeff and I talked about last Friday when Jeff Sintel was here with us on DawgNation Daily. He's ready to make a decision now, too. He said kind of his day is going to shift around here a little bit, but he's down to Georgia and Texas A&M. I honestly don't know quite exactly how all this is going to play out. It seems like Georgia's in the mix. Certainly on the Daniels side of this, that's true. Daniels has made the Dogs, along with Texas A&M, his top two. How does that impact Georgia's recruitment of Donovan Edwards? I don't really know. I don't really know when Edwards would even be able to take a visit to Georgia, so does that impact this? The one thing that Daniel seems to have going for me is he's a very fast player. Georgia offensively probably missing that speed element a little bit. So if you wanted to, move more fully down the road with Amari Daniels, you have a chance to do that. That's a name worth watching. And then you get to Deion Bowie here a little bit too, one of just the premier athletes for the class of 2022. And I think it's Sunday that Bowie's getting ready to make his announcement. So as I said before, it's not just 2021 momentum for Georgia right now. It's 2022 momentum too. The Bowie thing this weekend becomes a huge, huge deal. So here's what I tell you to do. Go back and check out this week's edition of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Jeff's got a lot of stuff for you on that. He'll be with us on our show tomorrow. We'll get into Bowie, TID, a little bit more on Amari Daniels. We'll do all of that with him. But it's one of those times of years we kind of head towards November where it becomes parallel storylines here. It's Georgia on the field, but it's also big recruiting stuff there as well. So a lot of really fun stuff going on with all of that. And that is our Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily here today. And by the way, speaking of our friends at Kroger, I was just there this week stocking up on all the Halloween candy. They have a great Halloween section right in the middle of the store that's kind of closest to my house. And so there's big savings right now, too. You can get 30% off of all kinds of Halloween merchandise at Kroger. Lights, pumpkin carving kits, also great savings for candy there as well. I'm kind of a last-minute shopper when it comes to stuff like this, but we like taking the whole family out and getting masked up and going out there and getting stocked up. So big savings at Kroger if you want to do that right now as part of our Kroger Fresh Take here on our program. And by the way, to wrap things up, as I said before, heading towards the cocktail party next Saturday. Not too early to start thinking about that here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. How about that Gator Hitter Updater? 1,461 days. 1,461. Good number, good way to close it out. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do all of that for you. As I said before, hopefully you find yourself in a situation where your electricity is actually on right now. If it's not, my certainly prayers go out to you. Hopefully you can get that fixed up and taken care of before too much longer. But anytime something goes out around your house, a water heater or something like that, R.S. Andrews ought to be the first thing you think about in terms of showing up, getting it fixed, getting you back on track. You can find them online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. All right, let me go to YouTube first today, I think. I can't really remember where I was yesterday, so I'll start on YouTube first today. And we'll run through a few comments, and then we'll kind of get off the air after that. And hope all of you are doing great and having a good day. Xavier Cottle says, do you think Kirby Smart should purposely play two quarterbacks? I think if he doesn't, we should assume that he's purposely not for a reason. And that's been my only thing here, is that, you can say that Kirby mishandled the 2018 situation if you want to. You'd have some evidence to support your opinion if you do. But I haven't lost faith in him to the point where I would say if Smart is doing things the way that he is, I still assume that he must have a valid reason for doing that. So what we've been saying here is there's a statistical benchmark we'd like to see Stetson Bennett perform at on Saturday. And if he doesn't, then playing multiple quarterbacks or playing a different quarterback besides him, I think becomes a more reasonable argument to make. But the toughest thing for a Georgia fan right now is that Georgia may just not quite have what other teams have at quarterback. So how do you make sure you have the best situation you have available there? Green Soldier says, I know UGA has quarterback issues, but LSU is really showing us how it's done in 2020. Best quarterback of the year to what they are, now. Yeah, I mean, they've kind of went on a wild ride for sure. Michael Porter says, do you think running the ball more could be better improvement for the offense? I think in games like the ones that Georgia's about to play, I think that's probably true. Against Kentucky on Saturday, almost certainly. Against Florida the following week, I think that running the ball is a big advantage for Georgia there because Florida is neither good at running it themselves nor particularly good at stopping it. So therefore, Georgia has a nice advantage in that game. And you could continue to roll through the rest of the regular season doing things very much that same way. But eventually you get back to a team that has a very high-powered offense. And, if you're running it for 4 yards a clip while they're throwing it for 8 yards a clip, then obviously at a certain point in time, you're just going to be at a disadvantage there. So the successful running game is something that Georgia will, I believe, utilize to its advantage for the rest of the regular season. But if it gets a chance to play the kind of postseason games it wants to play, then those games become about your ability to throw the ball once again. Ray Johnson says, we need to make sure every player, especially quarterback, needs to be afraid of being benched. That's why Bama plays so well. Your position is never guaranteed. Saban would have jerked Stetson Bennett out. Maybe he would. Let's get a few more. Nacho Helmet says Hudson Mason was correct. Kirby has to treat the quarterback room differently than all the other positions. Well, this is where I'm going to be too much of a gentleman to completely revisit this. But when I spent a lot of time this spring saying that I would treat Jamie Newman as the starting quarterback and not put him through one of these orchestrated competitions, I was told that you couldn't treat quarterback any different than any other position at the time. So I'm too much of a gentleman to say, hey, why don't we revisit that conversation a little bit? But, the cockamamie, competition thing with a guy like Newman, I wonder how things could have been differently had Georgia just kind of treated him like the starting quarterback and chosen to develop him as opposed to, I joked about this in the show the other day. When it comes to competition at quarterback, sometimes it's iron sharpening iron and a better player is produced. Sometimes it's two sticks rubbing together and a brush fire is produced. And you can decide for yourself which one of those 2020 is. Army Dog Charlie says, how about we trust the guys who watch practice every day? Yeah, I know that gets like a very tiring argument after a while, but I do think what Charlie brings up there is really a pretty good point. As I said before, if you look at the stats for Stetson Bennett, including some of the ones that SEC StatCat published this week, the notion that Kirby Smart is sticking with Bennett because Bennett's careful and Smart wants to be careful. Bennett's actually not particularly careful with football. In fact, that's the thing that Smart has said over and over again they want him to do more of. So the notion of, Smart sticks with Bennett through some sort of stubbornness because Bennett's his game manager that helps him protect his defense, that's not exactly what Stetson Bennett is kind of known for. All right, what else? A few more over on the Facebook side now. Tennille said I was YouTube first yesterday. I will admit I could not remember what I did. Richway Tools says this. He says, how about less talk about Bennett and more talk about Monken? Monken had no solid game plan against Bama. Bennett isn't the best, but he runs a smooth offense. You have to work around his style as a coordinator. So, Rich, that's an interesting thing to hear from you because I think for the most part, I've actually been pretty happy with Todd Monken. Georgia's offense is not spectacular, but I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest it's better than it was a year ago. If you kind of want to go through game by game stuff, comparing Georgia to SEC opponents from last year, or even if you want to do, Power 5 opponents from last year, I think the evidence would kind of back that up. Georgia's a long way from where it needs to be, but it is better than it was a season ago. So I got no beef with Todd Monken. Now, the improvement needs to continue, and if it stalls out, then obviously he'll take some of the blame for that. But I don't really have a lot of complaints about Monken right now. Tavedas Taylor says UGA can't get married to average game manager quarterback play. Must divorce it. So, from that standpoint, I said before, I think that a lot of people assume that's true, that this is just Georgia wanting to stick with a game manager style quarterback. But I think the evidence could not be more apparent. That's not exactly what they are. And by the way, I guess our friends at Merriweather and Tharp were in the comment sections. That's good to know. I don't see their comment, but I see a lot of people responding to them. Miriam Martin Corbin, I'd love to see you in Jacksonville as well, for sure. It's going to be a weird year there this year. No tailgating, things like that. Going to be a weird year. Matt Rugavina says that Bennett could have used the pump fake more against Alabama. Maybe so. Mike Little says, I believe they need to get our receivers on the same page with Bennett. They can turn and come back to the ball knowing he doesn't have the big arm. Bama continued to do that against do that with Devontae Smith. Maybe that could be the case. One of the things that you sometimes see in the NFL, at least you used to see this. I don't know if you still see as much as you used to. But in the NFL, one of the things that like Brett Favre used to do, quarterbacks like that, when you have these great defensive backs running step for step with great wide receivers, the underthrown ball used to be a little bit of a weapon. It was the thing the receiver knew it was going to be a step or two underthrown, and therefore you could come back on it and either get tangled up with the defensive back and lead to a pass interference, or just became a move that you could make. Kind of the NFL that I grew up with around the 90s or so, the underthrown ball was a little bit of a weapon. Now, it can't be way underthrown, but a step or two underthrown, sometimes not the worst thing in the world. Mikey Watkins says it's not rocket science. Bennett is all we have. I will say that I mean, I think one of the things that has frustrated people so much over the course of the last couple of weeks is that's the thing that people just don't want to believe is true. And honestly, I'm hopeful that whether it be Bennett playing better or someone emerging, I mean, Georgia, I'm obviously very hopeful that Georgia gets better quarterback play at some point in time this season. I'm quite hopeful of that. But there are some times in which it just sort of works out the way that it seems like it's going to. I mean, there is a chance that for whatever reason, Bennett is just the guy. And there is no, better option. There's nobody waiting on the bench to come in and save the day, either because of injury or inexperience or something along those lines. Rick Joyner says Bennett took shots at the Bama game. A game manager doesn't do that. That's right. I mean, remember when you had Mel Tucker calling him the GOAT and, the things that McCole Hardman once said about him and all that kind of stuff. Like, he didn't earn that respect as a scout team quarterback because of how careful he was. I even said this about, when he first started, playing for Georgia. You would expect him, I think in some cases, to kind of embrace the underdog aspect of who he is. But if anything, he's a little bit of a chip on his shoulder about some of that kind of stuff. He's not one of these aw shucks, just glad to be here type guys. That's not really what his personality is. Bennett, for better or worse, is going out there trying to make play. He doesn't want to be careful with the football. He wants to try to make something happen. So, I would say his personality may be a little bit different than some people think it is. Chase Smith says he abandoned the run versus Alabama, and that's my complaint. I understand that, Chase. I do totally get that. But I said this at the time. If you watch, like, a lot of NFL games now, I mean, there are good teams that run the ball, but most of the time, those good teams run the ball when they're on their way to winning. We've never lived in an era in which passing on first down in the NFL is more popular than it is right now. There have never been a larger, preponderance of teams who are throwing the ball 60-something% of the time, something along those lines. This has become a passing league. And if you're Georgia, you can work to establish the run. But if you're trading 4 yards a carry for their 8 yards per play because, the opponent's willing to throw the ball, then that's not going to work out in your favor very much. That the game really is about matching explosive plays with your opponent. And you can only get the explosives by trying to go for them. And as I said yesterday, you've also got to, have your own version of defensive, impactful, negative plays to negate the other side's explosive. So if you're playing the very best teams in the country, the ones that do have that high-powered offense, you're not going to keep that offense on the sideline by running the football. And listen, I mean, I'm a big believer in running the ball. I'm a fan of Georgia's RBU. I like all of that. All of that kind of stuff matters against Kentucky. It matters against Florida, who I don't think is among the best of the best. But once you get into that, to the real heavyweight division, it's about, how big of a haymaker can you throw? And I do believe that. Cortez Wimberly says, do you have any injury updates? Let me think here for a moment. So we mentioned on the show, Kirby says that he thinks that Pickens is going to be fine, but do with that what you will. I guess Monty Rice is still a little banged up after being seen in a boot before the Alabama game. I was told that he was in the boot starting Wednesday of that week. When it comes to that, sort of thought he was, kind of the same way that Pickens is fine for Saturday. Monty Rice was supposed to be fine going into the Alabama game, and while he played, I don't know that he was necessarily 100%. That still kind of lingers with him. I guess the DJ Daniel thing is still out there a little bit right now. He's trying to get healthy. Is there anybody else I'm not thinking about? Let's see what else. Blake Ware says on the issue of trusting the coaches watching practice, Epic Robinson likes it when I false start my way out the door. Yeah, Epic, I do that a lot. Chase Barbie says maybe the offensive scheme is too much in the quarterback room to get in 1 year. Definitely a struggle, and I don't see anybody making a huge stride in learning it all this year. That's why Kirby is wanting to get back to Georgia football, to give them a chance this year with that elite defense. Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been down the road about what an elite defense does against an elite offense right now. But, let's watch TJ Finley again on Saturday. This is a not elite recruit. This is like a top 500 recruit in the country, top 25 recruit in the state of Louisiana. This is not Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields level prospect. Let's see how Finley does in what I'm assuming is going to be his second start against Auburn on Saturday. Let's see if he maintains the magic that he had while playing at home against South Carolina. And that's what I, as kindly as I can when it comes to like Beck and Mathis, guys who have a lot to recommend about their skill sets, that when you think about freshmen who step in and play well right away, you're typically talking about guys who have that kind of elite prospect status attached to their name, and that's not necessarily in comparison to, once again, guys like Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. That's just not quite the recruiting profile that Beck and Mathis brought to the table. Now, if Finley, who was really a worse recruit than either Mathis or Beck, if he plays well again for LSU on Saturday, then maybe there's a chance that I'm wrong about that. But my guess is you probably see a little bit of a return to expectations for Finley this week on the road against Auburn. But I think that's just important to remember that the idea of stacking 5 stars on top of 5 stars on top of 5 stars, that's not really what the Georgia quarterback situation is right now. They do have a former 5-star, but I think it is just obvious that he's not healthy enough to play. He might eventually be, but not right now. A little bit more, and then we're going. Matt Rucavino and Monken using the tight ends more, calling it an archaeological miracle. Yeah, I do like that aspect of Monken pretty well. Hope to see more of it. Eric DeVorncy says, how about nothing but pass plays to start, get the lead, and then go back to our running plan? Maybe so. Bobby Bryan wants to feed Kendall Milton. My guess is you do see a good bit of Milton on Saturday. Jeff Ingram says, I guess we're supposed to have an overnight transformation. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think that maybe people do want it to happen fast. I want it to happen fast. But as Jeff kind of alludes to there, the chance is it just happens a little more slowly. Chase Barbie says Kirby has his hand too deep in the offense. I wonder if that's still true. It may have used to have been true. I wonder if that's still true right now. I mean, I think to go back to Jeff's point, there's a chance that the transformation is just a little slower than people want it to be. That for as easy as some of these teams make scoring look, becoming the kind of team that scores in that manner, maybe it's just hard to make that transformation. Chase Smith says the more you run, the more you stay on the field, the less chance they have for big plays. I think the problem with that, though, is that some of the if you want to go back to like 2017 when Kirby kind of introduced the keep chopping wood mentality, I think the unspoken part of the willingness to keep chopping wood, run the ball at the beginning of the game, establish the run when the run wasn't quite working, I don't think it was much of a problem to give the ball back to the kinds of teams that Georgia was mostly playing in 2017. The SEC East was horrible. Every team in the division was terrible in 2017. So keep chopping wood was fine as long as you were playing very limited offenses. And for the most part, the SEC was pretty limited offensively in 2017. Even Alabama didn't explode offensively the way they would because, Tua Tagovailoa spent most of that season on the bench. That committing yourself to the run, establishing the run, if you will, when you then have to give the ball back to somebody who's going to march right down the field and score and put you in a deficit, it's just harder now than it used to be. The game, it just seems to be really changing. Robert Barnes says, you're wrong, BA. You must give the defense a rest against this wide-open offense. Maybe that's true, Robert, but how many examples of the same game played over and over again do people need to see before they realize that you've got to be in there throwing the same number of haymakers? Daniel Aldrich asked a good question. Where is Eddie? Eddie is right there, and I keep forgetting to put him back on the desk. That is my bad, and that is not a good precedent to set. Daniel Lewis also pointing that out, too. Jarvis Hanna as well. Sorry, y'all. Hold on one second. There he goes. Sorry about that. All right. We're gone in 1 minute. 1 minute away. Rob Gordon says, why does Kirby keep everything so close to the vest? I would kind of agree with that a little bit, that sometimes the overwhelming secrecy doesn't seem to be helping as much as you might think. Johnny Lester, yeah, I had to go pick up Eddie. People were asking about Eddie. I had to go get him. All right, what else? Bionic says, do a tour of the studio. Yeah, one day we will do that. One day, I think that's a pretty good idea. One day we'll show you everything we have in here. Not a bad idea. All right, we got to get ready to go. Thanks for being here. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. It's our R.S. Andrews cooldown. By the way, y'all make sure you check out the AJC for your Atlanta news now. Heading towards Election Day, you can get updates on all of that and how that is going. Pretty important thing all the way around. You can also just continue to follow all the sports news as well. That's a lot of fun, too. A lot of just Atlanta news now. Halloween activities here in our city. Heading towards a holiday season. Get good preview of all that kind of stuff. Atlanta News Now at AJC.com. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cooldown possible. You know, if your water heater goes out, in any case, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. But you need to find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great Thursday. Hopefully your power is on, or if it's not, it's getting ready to come back on. Hopefully you're staying safe and picking up the pieces if you got a little bit of bad weather last night. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Good show for us tomorrow. Looks like in addition to Jeff Sintel, we'll also have a special guest with us as well. So we'll tell you more about that then. It's DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. Have a great day, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.